Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. With the war in Ukraine grinding on and US aid uncertain, the European Union is under pressure to find new ways to finance support for Kyiv. A controversial proposal to use roughly 210 billion euros in frozen Russian state assets has gained traction, but not without resistance. Italy has now joined Belgium, Malta and Bulgaria in opposing the plan, warning of major legal and financial consequences. Joining us today on TVP World to unpack this evolving standoff is Aleksander Cwalina. He's a contractor with the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Centre, a specialist in European security policy and transatlantic relations. Aleksander, welcome back to TVP World. Good to see you again.
Hi. Good evening. Happy to join.
Okay, so why is this such a controversial move? One would have thought that freezing the assets of an aggressor in this way and using those assets to pay for the damage that aggressor has caused would seem perfectly acceptable. What's the problem?
So currently, just to sort of recap the current plan, is the total package, the reparations loan, is worth around 210 billion euros, which is not a small sum, which includes around 165 billion euros in cash in immobilized Russian frozen assets sitting in Euroclear, which is based in Belgium. Belgium was the most outspoken critic of the plan, due to primary concerns centering on being the host country for Euroclear, which involved fears that any scenarios involving immediate repayment or litigation from Moscow and Russia would leave Belgian taxpayers holding the bag for any damages awarded, and on top of possibly bankrupting Euroclear or leaving Belgium with the payments to arbitration and legal fees.
But surely the European Union, which has generally sanctioned this idea, would be there to have Belgium's back, wouldn't it?
That is the plan currently. The outline of the proposal as it currently stands would include a guarantee of a portion of the loan based on the economic contributions of each member state of the European Union. For example, Ireland will back around 2% of the loan under the plan. The proposed loan would also guarantee that financial responsibility for any possible settlements would be borne by the EU as opposed by Belgium, with additional commitments from Commission President von der Leyen to have security, to have guarantees from the side of the European Union in the case of any sort of backlash or targeting from Moscow. However, Italy, Belgium, Malta, and Bulgaria are currently standing in opposition, either due to not believing in these guarantees or fears that this would sort of create a Russian-backed backlash towards that may lead to, for example, Russian seizure of any remaining assets, European assets in Russia, or, for example, set a precedent in which China, for example, or any other actors would unilaterally seize European assets abroad.
Right. Okay. So far you mentioned 4 countries, but Italy is the latest in those countries to object to this plan. What is the impact of Italy putting its weight behind these objections?
Italy is one of the largest member states in the European Union, and its withdrawal, or at least objection to this deal, is a big hurdle. The upcoming European Council meeting on December 18th and 19th is the big decision point for whether or not this deal will come through, and is of decisive importance, as President Antonio Costa of the European Council has said. If Italy is backing out of the deal, or at least posing strong objections to this deal, that could put it in real danger heading into this meeting this week. And we will see after December 18th and 19th on where this deal will proceed. But without Italy's backing, it seems to be in dangerous territory.
So what alternatives are there for the EU to follow? There's been some talk of issuing some kind of debt using these assets as security. How many? How far has that conversation gone?
So European common debt is never a very popular topic of discussion within the European Union. There's been some precedent of that under COVID and pandemic spending, but it remains a very controversial solution within the European Union. As you mentioned, there are several alternatives should this proposal fail. The reparations loan deal. Many European officials, for example, are sort of mulling this alternate format that would involve joint debt guaranteed by the EU budget, which is, as I mentioned, similar for what happened under COVID-19, under the pandemic. But there's speculation that this would similarly face opposition in Hungary and possibly even from France and Germany, who are reticent to support plans towards a European common debt writ large. If this also fails, there is always the backing of just bilateral country-to-country agreements between Ukraine and member states of the European Union. This includes, for example, Germany sending direct payments and financial support to Ukraine. Denmark and the Netherlands have been very good at this, but again, this would leave countries, for example, as Spain and Italy, who have been contributing slightly less to Ukraine as sort of off the hook, to put it shortly. There's also been there's been just very minor discussions about this sort of bridge or interim solution during the upcoming meeting, in which maybe it's not the entirety of Russian assets, but a smaller loan covering the Ukraine's most urgent needs for 6 months, because the main deadline for Ukraine to plug its budget shortfall is for April 2026. So there could be some sort of interim smaller loan during this time.
So what happens to the bulk of that Russian money? It stays frozen until Russia gets it back? I mean, how does that make sense? Russia is paying nothing for reparations.
So at least the way the loan has structured the status of frozen Russian assets is this is approximately 165 billion euros worth in cash at Euroclear. There is currently the interest off these immobilized assets is being used to fund Ukraine, but that is only approximately 3 billion euros a year, which isn't really sufficient enough to fund Ukraine. So under this plan, for example, Euroclear would lend approximately 180 billion. These 180 billions to a European entity at zero interest, which then would reimburse existing G7 loans and lend about a separate 135 billion to Ukraine. Under this scheme, Ukraine would owe the EU the money, but it would only repay this only after sanctions are lifted and after Russia agrees to pay war reparations, at least under the current structure. So currently these assets are frozen, and only the interest based off these assets is being put into use in Ukraine. There have been some discussions, specifically from the Belgian Prime Minister, against this proposal to use this as a possible bargaining chip in peace negotiations. But the matter of the fact is that Ukraine needs this money to continue defending not only Ukraine's borders, but also defending against continued Russian aggression in the European eastern flank.
Right. Now, how many of these ideas require unanimous EU approval? Because, as you mentioned earlier, Hungary and Slovakia are unlikely to back anything that supports some kind of solution. Is it possible to circumvent their approval?
That is a very touchy and controversial question. There have been aspects before where during the European Council meetings, for example, that Hungary has abstained from these key decisions regarding support and enlargement for Ukraine. But these decisions are under unanimous voting and unanimous consent for the European Union, since they deal with large sums of money and possibly taxation of European citizens and backing of these large loans. So these are decisions that require unanimous decisions and a united front from the European Union towards supporting Ukraine and supporting and fighting against Russian aggression. And so even structurally, unanimity is needed, but also symbolically, it is something that is crucial to continue supporting Ukraine into what is heading into the fourth year of the war.
Well, zooming out a little bit and talking about EU credibility, it seems to be losing credibility by the day, doesn't it? It doesn't seem able to create, a unified response to even something like this, or the provision of military aid to Ukraine. They're all done country by country. What can be done to present the European Union as a more unified bloc?
I think it's just, at least in the context of the Russian continued invasion of Ukraine, it's worth just highlighting that Ukraine is not the last target of Russian aggression. We've seen a hybrid campaign of cyber warfare, of sabotage, of espionage across not only Eastern Europe and Central and Eastern Europe, but also Western European countries. And in terms of how to support Ukraine and how to continue presenting a unified front, I think it's important to underline that, for example, as recent research by Norwegian think tanks Korisk and NUPI, they predict that the expense of fortifying Ukraine or fortifying Europeans' eastern flank against a Russia that would triumph in Ukraine or occupy Ukraine will cost approximately $1.6 trillion, which is much more than what is currently demanded or needed in Ukraine. So I think just highlighting the fact that I don't think Russian victory should be presented as an option. I think it should be presented as something that has to be stopped by all costs, because not only is it crucial for Ukraine, but also for continued spending and for continued security for the whole of the European continent. And I think that is important to get across Europe and across the Atlantic, also to provide a united front and unity against the continued Russian aggression and threats.
Well, you mentioned across the Atlantic, but there doesn't seem to be much unity between the US and the European Union at the moment. Very, very quickly, how do you see that picture? Very quickly, if you would, please.
No, yes, of course. I agree that the current picture from across the Atlantic is looking more and more complicated. I think this is the case wherein Europe and the European Union just needs to lead by example, which makes this upcoming decision about how to fund Ukraine all the more crucial.
All right, Aleksander Cwalina, thank you very much indeed for sharing your analysis with our audience. Have a good evening, sir.
Excellent. Thank you. You as well.
Thank you. Bye-bye. That brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away, though. Lots more coming up. Goodbye.